Well, I think I've been writing for years, one way or another, and thinking through poetry or thinking into poetry. My background is fine arts, and I think making a lot of visual work, which then moved towards text-based work, and writing being a medium of working rather than drawing, so of recording things live. And then I started to do long walks, which documented encounter, and how encounter gave rise to a kind of poetic experience as a kind of attempt to articulate and phrase experience of the world, the transient world. And from there, in a way, slowed down into writing things that I wouldn't call poems, but kind of contained poetic material. And then it's sort of been a journey from there. I was very interested in writing poems, but I wanted to kind of get down to the kind of very basis of what writing is and what articulation is, what language is and what being in language is. And so devised these means of like walking being a kind of generator for sort of a metabolic rate to kind of generate kind of series of encounters that I have to articulate. So that they were really ways of framing that moment. I did a long walk around, I did two big walks. One was following Wordsworth and Coleridge in their tour around the Lake District in 1799. I walked it in 1999. And that's about 140 miles, and it was really just partly an escape from the very intense environment of the Wordsworth Trust, where I was based at the time, and this extraordinary collection of manuscripts. So my response was to just go out into the landscape that the poets themselves walked and to try and respond to it kind of on that sort of base line of just pure experience. But the second walk was really more kind of formative in what I sort of have done since, which was a walk around London. And I had no idea of where I was walking, except that I drifted and wandered around London, about 50 miles over a year, 24 walks that are consecutive, so it links up. And the purpose there was really to kind of try and use London as a kind of very intense pool of potential. So, I mean, you walk through London and you are one of millions, and so there's a kind of line, a storyline, but if you encounter things and lives, it's sort of cutting across the grain of London in a way. So you kind of have potentially hundreds, thousands of encounters in a very small space. So it's a very good lab, if you like, for that kind of attempt to draw out poetic sort of articulation, response, similes, metaphor, whatever. Well, Bee Journal began really with not the intention to write about bees, which is what it's not necessarily about, but kind of immersed in. But it began with just the kind of attempt to keep bees. And it was collecting the bees on Exmoor one evening, being immersed in flying insects for the first time, thinking I might write a poem. But kind of at that point, realizing that actually this was going to become something much more obsessive, and that the bees really were a kind of huge gravitational force and a complete focus, and that when you keep bees, you step into bees, they surround you, they dominate you in some ways. You have to learn to remain calm. You have to change your physiology and your whole approach to the environment that you're in. So that suited the way I'd been thinking about writing, and also you stand a beehive in the landscape, and because I've been seeing the landscape as a kind of theatre for writing, and sort of one that you appropriate for the act of writing and writing about as well, that the hive stood centre stage. Suddenly it defined that theatre. I feel in a way that my whole process has been working towards maybe kind of writing a poem, but I kind of hold off the idea that they are poems. So I might be told off for that by my publisher, but it's really, I'm kind of interested in where the poem begins, and sort of just holding back from sort of tidying it up and losing some of that kind of odd energy that hangs around the making of something. And it's a bit like stepping into a workshop. I'm always kind of interested in seeing workshops and where this sort of physical space in which people work, where they leave their tool, where they put down their cup of tea, or those sort of arrangements that people make of working. And so I suppose in writing I'm interested in that kind of keeping some of that in and sort of holding it there on the page with what might sort of lean towards something more kind of articulated or finished or reworked. So the sort of the process, the palimpsest, if you like, of the process sort of lies a little more on the page. The form of the journal wasn't really determined either at the beginning. It grew as I sort of moved with the bees around the course of the year, and then 2 years in the end. And it seemed that the journal suited that sort of progression around the sun, but also as a kind of a sort of stop frame piece about 2 years. So it's a holding of time. So each entry, if you like, is not necessarily a poem in its own right, but the whole journal is a kind of poem of pieces, of phases of time.